The Galactic Concord had ruled the stars for 10,000 years. They were old, they were powerful, and they had one law that every species in the galaxy had to follow: no projectile weapons. No guns, no cannons, nothing that fired solid objects at high speed. They called it the Treaty of Silence. Long ago, before humans had even learned to make fire, the great spacefaring races had fought terrible wars with projectile weapons. 17 star systems had been destroyed. Billions had died. The survivors had agreed to ban all such weapons forever. Energy weapons were allowed. Plasma rifles, laser cutters, sonic disruptors. These were considered civilized, but anything that threw metal through the air at killing speed was forbidden. When the Concord discovered Earth, they came with a fleet of 1,000 ships. Admiral commanded them. He was 7 feet tall, with pale blue skin and 4 eyes that never blinked. His species had been part of the Concord for 8,000 years. He had never met a race that refused to follow the law. His message was simple. He broadcast it to every screen, every radio, every device on Earth. "People of Earth," he said, his voice cold and flat through the translator, "you have developed projectile weapons. This is a violation of galactic law. You will surrender all firearms within 1 solar cycle. Every gun, every bullet, every weapon that fires solid projectiles must be destroyed. If you refuse, we will sterilize your planet from orbit. There will be no negotiation." The message ended. The world went mad. In Seoul, Lieutenant Commander watched the broadcast from her office at the Naval Academy. She was 32 years old, with short black hair and steady hands. She had trained for 15 years to defend her country. Now she was being told to throw away everything she had learned. Beside her stood Master Sergeant. He was a large man, built like a wall, with scars on his hands from 20 years of combat training. He did not speak for a long time. Then he cracked his knuckles and said, "They think we will just give up." "Maybe we have to," said quietly. "Look at those ships, we cannot fight them." "I did not say fight," replied. "I said give up. Those are different things." The surrender happened quickly. World leaders had no choice. The conquered ships could destroy every major city in hours. Resistance meant death for everyone. Soldiers wept as they handed over their rifles. Police officers watched their pistols get melted into slag. Hunters surrendered shotguns that had been in their families for generations. Everything made of metal that could fire a bullet was taken. The conquered inspectors were very good at their job. They had technology that could detect gunpowder residue from a kilometer away. They could scan a building and find a single bullet hidden in a wall. They searched everywhere. They found everything. Or so they thought. Colonel was 63 years old. He had served in the military for 40 years. He had fought in wars, trained soldiers, and buried friends. When the disarmament order came, he did not cry. He did not rage. He simply nodded and began to think. Knew something that the aliens did not. He knew history. 3 weeks after the surrender, gathered 17 people in a bunker deep beneath the mountains. The bunker had been built during the old wars, before Korea was united. It did not appear on any map. The conquered scanners had passed over it without notice. The 17 people were special. Some were blacksmiths who still practiced the old ways of metalworking. Some were engineers who understood physics better than any alien scanner. Some were bowyers, craftsmen who made bows by hand using techniques passed down for centuries. And some were soldiers, stood at the head of a long table. On the table were old documents, recovered from museum archives before the conquered could catalog them. Blueprints, diagrams, technical drawings of weapons that had not been used in serious warfare for 500 years. "The conquered outlawed guns," said. His voice was calm, like a teacher explaining a simple lesson. "They banned chemical propellants. They banned electromagnetic acceleration. They banned anything that uses technology to throw a projectile." He paused and looked at each person in the room. They did not ban muscle and steel. He unrolled one of the documents. It showed a compound bow, but not like any bow used for sport or hunting. This was a weapon of war, heavy, powerful, designed to punch through armor. Our ancestors conquered empires with bows and arrows, continued. They killed enemies in armor made of iron and leather. The conquered thinks we are helpless without our guns. They are wrong. They have simply made us remember what we were before guns existed. The blacksmith, a woman named, leaned forward to study the blueprints. She was 50 years old, with hands rough from decades of forge work. "The draw weight on this design," she said slowly. "It is very high, much higher than any modern bow. Only a very strong person could use it." "Then we will train very strong people," replied. Picked up another document. It showed a crossbow, but massive, meant to be operated by a team of soldiers. The bolt it fired was the size of a man's arm. "This could punch through ship armor," said. There was something new in his voice. Hope, maybe, or hunger. "That is the idea," said. Studied the plans in silence. She understood what was proposing. It was insane. It was impossible. It would take years of work and training. The conquered had starships and energy weapons and technology humans could barely understand, and wanted to fight them with bows and arrows. But as she looked at the blueprints, she remembered something her grandfather had told her when she was young. He had been a hunter in the mountains, one of the last who still used traditional methods. "A gun is a tool," he had said. "Anyone can use a tool, but a bow is part of your body. It takes years to master, and when you do, nothing can stop you." Looked up at, "When do we start?" The old colonel smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a man who had found a way to fight when everyone else had given up. "We already have," he said. Outside the bunker, the conquered ships patrolled the skis. Their scanners searched for weapons, for resistance, for any sign of disobedience. They found nothing. Humans were cooperating. Humans were peaceful. Humans were beaten. Deep underground, the forges began to burn. 3 years passed under conquered occupation. The aliens built bases on every continent. They placed scanners in every city. They watched humanity with 4 eyes that never blinked, always searching for signs of forbidden weapons. Human soldiers were allowed to keep their uniforms but not their guns. They carried batons made of plasma-resistant material. They looked like guards at a museum, protecting nothing. The conquered grew comfortable. Humans were obedient. Humans were weak. Humans had accepted their place as the lowest members of galactic civilization. This was what the aliens believed. They did not know about the academies. In the mountains of Korea, hidden beneath old temple complexes and abandoned mines, humanity was rebuilding its oldest traditions. The locations were chosen carefully. Each one was in a place where the rock contained heavy metals that confused alien scanners. Each one was small enough to look like a natural cave system from above. Sergeant Myra ran the academy near. She was 35 years old, with arms thick with muscle and eyes that missed nothing. Before the occupation, she had been an Olympic archer. After the occupation, she had become something else entirely. Her training was brutal. Every morning, the recruits woke before sunrise. They ran 10 kilometers through the mountain trails carrying weighted packs. They did push-ups until their arms shook. They practiced drawing bows for hours, building the strength needed to pull strings that normal humans could not move. The bows they used were not normal bows. Master Engineer had designed them over 2 years of careful work. Each bow was a masterpiece of hidden technology. The limbs were made from alloys that did not officially exist, forged in secret facilities using methods the conquered had never seen. The strings were made from synthetic materials rated for spacecraft cables. The compound pulley system's human strength until a trained archer could launch an arrow with the force of a small missile. The draw weight on a standard hunting bow was about 50 pounds. The draw weight on war bows was 200 pounds. Only someone who had trained for years could use them. Anyone else would tear the muscles from their bones trying. But the arrows were the real secret. They looked simple, carbon fiber shafts wrapped in thin tungsten wire, steel broadheads sharpened to a molecular edge. No electronics, no explosives, nothing that would register on a Concord scanner as a weapon. Just steel and physics. Myra watched a young recruit named take position on the firing range. He was 20 years old, thin but strong, with the quiet focus of someone who had found his purpose in life. He had been training for 18 months. Today was his first test with live armor. At the far end of the range stood a target dummy wearing standard Concord infantry armor. The armor was made of layered ceramic and polymer, designed to stop plasma bolts and laser burns. It was considered impenetrable to primitive weapons. Raised his bow, drew the string back to his cheek, held his breath, released. The arrow crossed 60 meters in less than a heartbeat. It struck the armor dead center and kept going. The steel broadhead punched through the ceramic layers like they were paper. The shaft buried itself in the concrete wall behind the dummy. The armor had a hole the size of a fist in its chest. Myra nodded. "Better," she said. "Now do it while running." Did not complain. He never complained. None of them did. They understood what they were training for. They understood that when the time came, there would be no second chances. In another part of the mountain complex was showing General his creation. Had commanded a destroyer before the disarmament. She had been one of the youngest admirals in Korean naval history. When the Concord took her ship, she had considered ending her life rather than living in shame. Then had found her and given her a new purpose. Now she commanded the resistance. "We call it the dragon bow," said. He gestured to a massive weapon mounted on a tripod. It looked like a crossbow but scaled up to ridiculous proportions. The bow limbs were as thick as a man's thigh. The bolt it fired was a steel shaft nearly 2 meters long. "It requires 3 operators," explained. "One to aim, one to load, and one to pull the release mechanism. The draw weight is over 1,000 pounds. We use a system of gears and pulleys to make it possible for humans to operate." Studied the weapon with professional eyes. "What can it penetrate?" "We tested it on samples of ship-grade hull plating, Concord light cruiser class." Paused. "It went through both sides." Was silent for a long moment. She walked around the weapon, examining it from every angle. Finally, she asked the question that mattered most. "Can their scanners detect it?" "No chemical propellant," said. "No electromagnetic signature. No power source. Just mechanical energy stored in the bow limbs. To their technology, it looks like a large piece of exercise equipment." "How many can we build?" "If we increase production at all facilities, we can have 500 by next spring, plus 50,000 individual war bows and enough arrows to fight a campaign." Picked up one of the arrows. It was heavier than she expected. The steel tip gleamed in the underground lights. She thought about her destroyer, now sitting useless in a Concord impound facility. She thought about her crew, scattered across civilian jobs, forbidden from ever serving again. She thought about revenge. "Do it," she said, "and start designing something bigger, something that can reach orbit." His eyes widened. "General, the engineering challenges alone would be—" "I did not ask if it was easy," interrupted. "I asked you to design it. The Concord took our ships. They took our guns. They took our dignity. They think we are finished." She set the arrow down carefully on the workbench. "I want to remind them what humans are capable of when we have nothing left to lose." Above ground, the occupation continued. Concord patrols walked through Korean cities, their weapons visible on their hips. Human civilians bowed their heads and stepped aside. Human police officers pretended not to notice when aliens broke local laws. Everything seemed peaceful. But in the mountains, in the hidden places, the forges never stopped burning. The bowstrings never stopped singing, and somewhere in the darkness, 50,000 hunters were learning to kill gods. Myra finished her evening inspection and walked to the observation point at the edge of the complex. From here, she could see the lights of the nearest city, and above them, the faint glow of conquered patrol ships making their rounds. Joined her. He had become one of the best instructors in the program. His war bow had a draw weight of 240 pounds. No one else in the resistance could match it. "How long?" he asked. Myra understood the question. How long until they were ready? How long until they could fight? "Another year," she said. "Maybe 2. We need more archers, we need more weapons, we need the right moment." Nodded, he had patience. They all did. They had been preparing for 3 years. They could wait a little longer. "And when the moment comes?" Myra smiled. It was not a kind smile. "Then we show them what primitives can do." The moment came on Liberation Day. That was what the Conquered called it. The anniversary of humanity's peaceful integration into galactic civilization. The day when humans had wisely surrendered their barbaric weapons and accepted their place among the stars. Every year, the occupation government held celebrations across Earth. Parades, speeches, displays of conquered power and human obedience. Sub-Commander was in charge of the celebration inn. He was a tall alien with silver scales and 3 arms. He had been on Earth for 2 years and had grown to enjoy certain aspects of human culture. The food was interesting. The art was surprisingly sophisticated, and the humans themselves were almost charming in their weakness. This year had a special idea. He would hold a demonstration of human martial arts. Traditional weapons only, of course. Swords, spears, staffs. Nothing that violated the Treaty of Silence. It would show the visiting dignitaries how completely humans had accepted their disarmament. Captain volunteered his unit for the demonstration. Was 40 years old, with gray at his temples and scars on his hands. Before the occupation, he had been a Special Forces commander. After the occupation, he had become one of General's most trusted officers. He had spent the last 3 years training in the mountain academies, waiting for this exact opportunity. The Grand Amphitheater could hold 40,000 people. On Liberation Day, half the seats were filled with alien dignitaries, conquered officials in their gleaming environmental suits, military officers from a dozen different species, reporters from galactic news networks, broadcasting to hundreds of worlds. The other half was filled with humans, civilians who had been encouraged to attend, encouraged with food vouchers and reduced work quotas. They sat quietly, their faces blank, watching the stage where their conquerors would be entertained. Sat in the position of honor, a raised platform with the best view of the arena. Beside him sat Admiral himself, visiting from the orbital fleet to observe the festivities. "You have done well here," Sub-Commander said. His 4 eyes scanned the crowd without expression. The humans seemed properly subdued. "They are a simple species," replied. "Once you remove their weapons, they become quite manageable, like any primitive race." The demonstration began with sword dancing. Human performers in traditional clothing moved through ancient patterns, their blades flashing in the sunlight. The aliens watched with mild interest. Some took pictures with their recording devices. Then came the spear forms, the staff fighting, the empty-hand combat exhibitions. Each performance was met with polite applause from the alien section and silence from the human section. Finally, unit took the field. 20 soldiers in traditional Korean hanbok, the flowing robes that their ancestors had worn centuries ago. Each one carried what appeared to be a ceremonial compound bow, decorative, historical, completely harmless. Bowed deeply to the dignitary's platform. His voice was amplified across the stadium. "Honored guests," he said, "we will now demonstrate the ancient Korean art of archery. This practice is older than your interstellar travel. Our ancestors used these weapons before your ancestors left your home worlds." Scattered laughter from the alien section. How quaint, how primitive. We will shoot at targets, continued. Standard conquered infantry armor, a fair test of our humble weapons against your advanced technology. Workers set up 5 target dummies at the far end of the arena. Each dummy wore full conquered combat armor. The distance was 500 meters, an impossible range for any primitive bow the conquered had ever recorded. Leaned forward in his seat, amused. This would be entertaining. The humans would shoot their little arrows, the arrows would bounce off the armor, and everyone would be reminded of the natural order of things. Raised his bow. It was not a ceremonial weapon. It was a war bow, smuggled into the arena piece by piece over the past month, assembled that morning in a service corridor. The draw weight was 210 pounds. The arrow was carbon fiber and tungsten, tipped with hardened steel. Drew the string back to his cheek. The muscles in his arm stood out like cables. He held for 1 heartbeat, 2. He released. The arrow crossed 500 meters in less than a second. It hit the first target dead center and punched through the armor like it was made of cloth. The sound was like a thunderclap echoing across the silent arena. For a moment, no one moved. Then was on his feet, his translator unit screaming warnings. Projectile weapon discharge, security breach, all units respond. But's team was already moving. 20 bows rose in perfect unison. 20 strings sang. 20 arrows flew across the arena and destroyed 20 more targets. Armor plates shattered. Steel bolts embedded themselves in the arena walls. The sound was like continuous thunder rolling across the stunned crowd. Did not run. He did not hide. He walked calmly to the center of the arena where a microphone stood ready for the closing speeches. No firearms, he said. His voice was broadcast across the stadium, across the city, across the planet. Resistance technicians had hacked into the conquered communication network. Every screen on Earth was showing this moment. No explosives, no electromagnetic acceleration, just steel and human muscle. He held up an arrow so the cameras could see it clearly. You took our guns, said. You thought that would make us helpless. You forgot what we were before we had guns. You forgot that humans have been killing each other for 10,000 years with nothing but sharp sticks and determination. In the dignitaries section, Admiral was shouting orders into his communicator. Conquered soldiers were rushing toward the arena floor, but they were too slow. His message was already spreading across every human settlement in the solar system. We are not helpless, continued. We are not beaten, we are not your servants, we are hunters, we are warriors, and we remember what you made us forget. The first conquered soldiers reached the arena floor, set down his bow and raised his hands in surrender. He had known he would not escape. He had known this from the beginning. But that was not the point. The point was the message. In the mountain academies, General watched the broadcast with tears in her eyes. Around her, 50,000 soldiers saw one of their own standing proud before the alien invaders, showing the galaxy that humanity was not finished. In cities across the world, humans who had kept their heads down for 4 years looked up at their screens and felt something they had almost forgotten: hope, pride, rage. In the orbital fleet, admirals stared at the images coming from and felt, for the first time since the occupation began, something like fear. Was arrested. His team was arrested. They were taken to a conquered detention facility and interrogated for weeks. They revealed nothing. They had nothing to reveal. The resistance was too well hidden, too carefully organized. But the damage was done. The video of the demonstration spread across the galaxy. Other species watched humans punch through conquered armor with wooden bows and steel arrows. They watched a primitive species stand before their conquerors and declare that they would not be broken. And in hidden places across Earth, in mountain caves and underground bunkers, the message was clear. The waiting was over. The hunt had begun. The uprising did not happen with a single battle. It happened in shadows. It happened on mountain roads where conquered supply convoys disappeared without explanation. It happened in city streets where occupation soldiers walked into alleys and never walked out. It happened in the darkness between patrols, in the silence between heartbeats. The aliens had spent 4 years believing they understood humanity. They had human technology, human weapons, human capabilities. They had built their entire security system around preventing humans from acquiring firearms or energy weapons. They had not prepared for arrows. Lieutenant led a strike team through the forests north of Pyongyang. She was 28 years old, small and fast, with eyes that could spot a target at 800 meters. Her team consisted of 12 archers, each one trained in the mountain academies, each one carrying a war bow capable of killing anything that wore conquered armor. They had been tracking a supply convoy for 3 days. The convoy carried food and equipment for the northern occupation bases. More importantly, it carried replacement parts for the scanner network that the aliens used to monitor human activity. Without those parts, the scanners would start to fail. Blind spots would appear in the network. The resistance would have room to move. Spotter was a young man named. He lay beside her in the undergrowth, watching the road through a scope made of glass and wood. No electronics, nothing the aliens could detect. Contact whispered. 6 vehicles, 12 guards, light armor, 2 scouts ahead, 2 behind. Signaled her team into position. They used hand signs developed over months of training. No radios, no communicators, nothing that could be intercepted. The convoy came around the bend in the road, moving slowly on the rough terrain. The lead vehicle was an armored transport. Behind it came 4 supply trucks, each one loaded with equipment. The rear vehicle was another transport, carrying the remaining guards. The scouts were good. They scanned the tree line constantly, looking for threats, but they were looking for threats they understood. Humans with guns, humans with explosives, humans with technology. They were not looking for shadows with bows. Raised her hand, held it steady, waited until the convoy was perfectly positioned. She dropped her hand. 12 arrows flew from the forest. 12 guards died before they could raise their weapons. The shots were precise, aimed at the gaps in the armor, at the joints and seals where the protective plating was weakest. The archers had trained for this. They knew exactly where to strike. The scouts tried to respond. One of them managed to fire his plasma rifle into the trees, scorching a patch of bark. Then an arrow took him through the throat and he fell. The ambush lasted 11 seconds. When it was over, his team emerged from the forest and began their work. They stripped the convoy of everything useful: food, medicine, tools, anything that could help the resistance. The scanner parts were carefully destroyed, smashed into pieces too small to be repaired. Then they disappeared back into the mountains, leaving no trace except for a single arrow embedded in the lead vehicle's engine block. Attached to the shaft was a note in perfect galactic standard. "We do not need your technology to kill you. We just needed you to forget ours." The conquered found the convoy 6 hours later. By then, the archers were 50 kilometers away, resting in a hidden cave system before their next mission. Admiral received the report in his office aboard the orbital command station. It was the 7th convoy lost that week, the 12th that month. Human casualties in the resistance were minimal. Conquered casualties were climbing steadily. "How is this possible?" he demanded. His 4 eyes scanned the tactical display, searching for patterns he could not find. "They have no weapons. Our scanners detect nothing. Yet my soldiers are dying." His aide, a younger officer named, pulled up images from the convoy site. The projectiles recovered from the bodies are made of steel and carbon fiber. No chemical propellant. No electromagnetic signature. They appear to be launched by mechanical tension devices, primitive bows and crossbows. Bo's voice was flat. "We are being defeated by Bo's." "Not defeated, Admiral," harassed. "The Resistance lacks the numbers too." "They destroyed 3 scanner stations last night," interrupted. "They ambushed a patrol in Seoul. They assassinated the regional governor of Hokkaido with an arrow through his office window from 400 meters away." He slammed his hand on the desk. "This is not harassment. This is war." But it was a war the conquered did not know how to fight. Their technology was designed to detect firearms, explosives, energy weapons. It could spot a hidden gun from orbit. It could identify bomb-making materials through meters of concrete. It was useless against wood and steel and human muscle. Their armor was designed to stop plasma bolts and laser burns. It dispersed energy across its surface, absorbing and redirecting heat. It did nothing against a sharpened steel bolt traveling at 400 meters per second. Their tactics were designed for enemies with modern weapons, enemies who announced their presence with gunfire and explosions. They had no protocols for shadows that killed silently and vanished without trace. Across Earth, the resistance grew bolder. In Europe, Archer teams targeted conquered communication towers, destroying the equipment and disappearing before reinforcements could arrive. In Africa, hunters used compound bows to assassinate occupation officials in their own offices. In South America, resistance fighters armed with crossbows seized control of mining facilities and held them for weeks before conquered forces could respond. The aliens tried to adapt. They increased patrols. They restricted human movement. They implemented curfews and checkpoints and constant surveillance. None of it helped. The resistance did not need to move freely. They needed only patience. They waited until the patrols passed, until the guards looked away, until the moment was right. Then they struck, and then they vanished. In the mountain academy near, Sergeant Myra received word of successful mission. She smiled and marked another victory on the map that covered her office wall. 47 convoy ambushes, 23 assassinations, 15 scanner stations destroyed. Entered the office, carrying a report from the Southern Front. His face was grim but satisfied. "The occupation headquarters was hit last night," he said. "Arrow through subcommander's window. He survived, but he is requesting transfer off-planet." Myra's smile widened. Had been the one who organized the Liberation Day demonstration, the one who had called humans primitive and manageable. Now he wanted to run away. "What about Admiral?" she asked. "Still on the orbital station. He refuses to come down to the surface." Set the report on her desk. "His own soldiers are calling him a coward." "Good." Myra stood and walked to the window. Outside, young archers were training in the mountain dawn, drawing their bows again and again, building the strength that would let them kill gods. Let them fear us. Let them doubt each other. Let them understand that their technology will not save them. "And when they decide to stop playing nice?" asked. "When they start burning cities instead of occupying them?" Myra turned to face him. Her eyes were cold. "Then we give them nothing to burn. We scatter. We hide. We wait. And we keep killing them, one arrow at a time, until they decide that this planet is not worth the cost." She looked back at the training yard, at the rows of archers who had given up everything to learn the old ways. "They thought they disarmed us," she said quietly. "They were wrong. They just made us remember what we truly are." Outside, an arrow flew through the morning air and struck a target dead center. The sound echoed across the mountains like a promise. The hunt continued. The war lasted 14 months. In the beginning, the conquered believed they could crush the resistance quickly. They had starships. They had energy weapons. They had technology that humanity could not match. They sent more soldiers, more equipment, more resources to Earth. It did not help. The resistance adapted to every tactic. When the conquered increased ground patrols, the archers learned to shoot from greater distances. When the aliens improved their armor, The engineers designed new arrows that could find the weak points. When the occupation forces tried to seal off the mountains, the fighters moved to the cities and learned to hunt in urban shadows. Admiral lost 3,000 soldiers in the first 6 months. He lost 2 cruisers when human boarding parties cut their way into the ships using nothing but fusion welders and determination. The boarders had carried war bows with them. They had killed the bridge crews before the internal security systems could respond. The turning point came when General's forces captured the orbital scanner command center. It was supposed to be impossible. The command center was located on a space station, protected by energy shields and armed guards and the vacuum of space itself. No human could reach it without a spacecraft, and the Resistance had no spacecraft. But they had something else. Had spent 2 years designing the weapon. He called it the Heavenly Bow. It was a massive siege crossbow, 3 stories tall, built in sections and assembled on a mountain peak in the Himalayas. The bow arms were made from starship-grade alloys. The string was woven from cable rated for orbital elevator construction. The bolt was 5 meters long and carried a shaped charge at its tip. Not a bomb, a charge that used compressed air and mechanical springs to pierce hull plating. No electronics, no explosives that the conquered could detect. Just physics, just steel, just human stubbornness. The Heavenly Bow could launch its bolt to the edge of space. Gave the order on a clear night when the scanner command station passed directly overhead. The firing team had practiced for months, calculating trajectories, adjusting for wind and rotation and orbital mechanics. The bolt flew straight and true. It struck the station's main hull and punched through into the command center. The breach was small, but it was enough. Air rushed out. Systems failed, and before the station could seal the damage, a second bolt struck, carrying a team of soldiers in pressure suits who had volunteered for what everyone expected to be a suicide mission. They captured the station in 40 minutes. After that, the Conquered's advantages disappeared. Without the scanner network, they could not track Resistance movements. Without orbital surveillance, they could not predict attacks. Without the command station, they could not coordinate their scattered forces. The war became a nightmare for the aliens, an enemy that appeared from nowhere, struck without warning, and vanished without trace. Soldiers who carried no weapons their technology could detect, attacks that came from distances their doctrine said were impossible. Admiral requested permission to withdraw. The conquered High Council refused. They could not allow a primitive species to defeat them. It would encourage rebellion across the galaxy. So stayed, and his soldiers kept dying, and the arrows kept flying. In the end, it was not a military victory that ended the war. It was exhaustion. The conquered had spent more resources on the occupation of Earth than they had spent on any campaign in 1,000 years. They had lost ships, soldiers, and something more important. They had lost face. The entire galaxy had watched humanity fight back with weapons their ancestors had abandoned ago. Other species were starting to ask questions. If humans could resist the conquered with bows and arrows, what could they do with proper weapons? What would happen if the other conquered species remembered their own ancient traditions? The Treaty of New Earth was signed 14 months after the Liberation Day demonstration. General stood before the conquered council in their great chamber on their capital world. She wore her dress uniform, decorated with the symbols of a war she had won. Beside her, Admiral knelt in formal surrender, his fleet destroyed, his occupation in ruins. The council members looked down at her from their elevated seats. 17 species, each one older than humanity, each one more technologically advanced. They had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years. And they had been beaten by a species that had been in space for less than a century. "You made a mistake," told them. Her voice was calm, steady, carrying the weight of everything her people had suffered and survived. "You thought that by taking our guns, you had taken our ability to fight. You forgot what we were before we had guns." She reached into her belt and produced an arrow. Simple carbon steel, hand-forged, without decoration or ornament. She placed it on the council's table in front of the eldest member. "We were hunters," she said. "We were survivors. For 1,000,000 years, we survived on a dangerous world by bending wood and stone and metal into weapons that kept us alive. You did not disarm us. You just reminded us who we truly are." The treaty was generous by conquered standards. Humanity was granted full sovereignty. All occupation forces would withdraw from the solar system within 1 year. Earth would be admitted to the Galactic Council as a full member, with all rights and protections. And a new clause was added to galactic law, proposed by 3 species who had watched the war with great interest. No species shall be required to surrender weapons classified as primitive or pre-technological. Such a requirement is recognized as both unenforceable and insulting to species dignity. 3 months later, humanity launched its first faster-than-light warship. It was built in the orbital shipyards that the conquered had constructed during the occupation. It bristled with weapons, missiles, plasma turrets and systems the aliens had never seen before, all perfectly legal now. Captain stood on the bridge, looking out at the stars through the main viewport. She had been promoted 4 times during the war. She had led boarding parties and assassination teams and the final assault on the orbital command station. She had killed more aliens than she could count. Now she commanded a starship. Stood beside her, serving as her first officer. His war bow was mounted on the wall of her ready room, preserved under glass. The plaque beneath it read, "When they took our future, we armed ourselves with our past. Think we will ever need it again?" asked, nodding toward the bow. Considered the question. The conquered was at peace with humanity now. Other species were reaching out, wanting trade, wanting alliances, wanting to understand how a primitive race had humiliated the most powerful civilization in the galaxy. But the galaxy was old, and full of dangers that humanity had not yet encountered. "I hope not," said finally, "but I am keeping it close, just in case." She turned to her crew, young officers who had grown up under occupation, who had trained in the mountain academies, who had learned to fight with steel and muscle before they ever learned to fight with starships. "Set course for the outer colonies," she ordered. "It is time to see what else is out there." The engines hummed to life. The stars shifted as the ship oriented toward its destination. And humanity, the species that had been conquered and disarmed and dismissed as primitive, sailed out into a galaxy that would never underestimate them again. Behind them, Earth turned slowly in the darkness. The mountains were quiet now. The forges had cooled. The academies had closed, their students scattered across 100 ships and stations. But the knowledge remained, the skills remained, the memory remained. The conquered had outlawed guns, and humanity had answered with steel bows. And that had made all the difference.